Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'm going to be talking about influenza cases and what's going on in the United States for this year and relative to last year. This year is a little bit worse off. I'll show you why. But before we do that, please go to my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and take a look at the different products that I offer. And if you would like to help to donate to help support my work, please donate on my homepage. You can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee, or you could be a paid member to my Patreon channel. All the links are in the description of this video. So just please go to my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and take a look at the different products that I offer that will help with you. All right. Now, I want to talk about influenza here. All right. And how the cases are getting worse. Um, and these different charts here. All right. So I have a chart here of this year. Now, the x-axis is when the flu season starts. So we're talking about how you read this is 2024 year, the 40th week. All right. And so we're already in 2025, and the data is lagging. This data is up to or through February 15th. Okay. Now we can take a look at all of these, or we can just take a look at certain sections of it. So percentage of positives total, all right, is hitting above 30, peaked at above 30, and last 15 days has been around 28 or so, 27. All right, 27, 26.8, so 27. Now, if we want to take a look at the differences between influenza A and influenza B, predominantly it's influenza A. All right. And then if we want to take the number of positives of specimens, we can take a look at all of A and all of B. Now, what is important to note here is the peak here. The peak for specimens is at 50,000. All right. So we're looking at a peak of 50,000 for A, and we're looking at a total percentage positive of, I'm sorry, we have a peak of 50,000 for A and 2,000 for B. All right. Now we have total positive percentage positive. All right, is at 31.42. So it's 31.42 peak, and we're looking at about 52,000 for number of positive specimens. Now, it has gone down a little bit, but we want to go in relative terms to last year. Now, that's the peak, and we're at now, 15 days ago, at 29 for number of positive specimens, and the percentage is at percentage of positives is at 26.8. but influenza A is 24.6 and influenza B is 2.15. All right. So that's so influenza A is the predominant one, and influenza, all right, influenza A is the predominant one. All right. That's what's key to understand here. All right. So we're peaking at approximately 50, above 50,000, about 52,000. And we're looking at percentage positives at 31. And then we're looking at 15 days later, it did drop down, but we're looking at approximately, I don't know, like 32 or so for number of specimens total. And then the total positive is at 26.8. Now what we want to do is take a look at what happened in last year, last flu season. Now the chart is a little bit different because it has all of the months, right? The flu season started in week 40 of last year. So, but this is last year's flu data. So we want to take a look at, zoom in, and we want to take a look at week 5, right? Why? Because when we're looking at the peak at week 5, week 5, week 6. And then week 7 is the last data that we have. So we want to compare those 3 data points. So week 5 is right here. All right. And in week 5, we had total positives at 16%. And we had total A at 13 and total B at 6,000. So B was more prevalent. I think it was more prevalent. Let me see. 5. Yeah. B was at 2,000, but last year it was at 6,000. But this year, A is at 50,000 at the peak for week 5. And week 5 here, we're looking at B is at 6,000, over 6,000, and A is at 13. So you can see here that we are worse off in week 5 and in week 6 and the last set of data, even in week 7. Because week 7 last year, it was at 15.56 total positives. And your total A was at 11,000. That was last year, 11,000 and 15.6. All right. For week 7, we're at 29,000 for A and 26.8% positive. It's a big difference. So this year is worse off. Okay. So that's important to keep in mind. Now, what I want to do is go to this chart was published the 20th, and we have some H5 detection going on here in California, in the East Coast. It's hard to tell it's hard to tell if that's New York or if it's New Jersey. It's hard to tell where it looks like it's New York. Maybe it's New York. New Jersey. It's New Jersey. Okay. All right. Now, what I want to look at is also the type of lineage. that's going on this flu season and compare it to last flu season. So this flu season, let's just take a look. Are there any H1s? No. Are there any A unable to subtype? No. Are there H3s? Yes, a lot of them. Are there H1N1s? Yes, a lot of them. Are there any A subtyping not performed? A little bit. Okay. Are there any B lineage? Unspecified. There's a few. I mean, they're, it's peaking at 100, 140. This is each week how many number of positive samples. H3N2, no. Victoria lineage, yes. But not very, I mean, you're talking only, peaking at 90. It's not that big. Yamagata, no. H5, yes. But it has been dying down. Okay, and these are okay. So now what we have is primarily, all right, we're peaking at um, just under 8,000. And in the okay, so how do I want to say this? H3 is a dominant one. All right. H3 is peaking at 3,000, and this one went down to 673. H1N1 peaked at just under 3,500. And then the latest data set in week 7, 1,115. And again, the Bs are not that significant. So we're really talking influenza A is dominant one. All right. With influenza A, H1N1, and H3. So it's H1 and H3 that are pretty much dominant here. Okay. H1N1, I mean. So now let's take a look at, so let's just keep these numbers in mind here. H3, 3,000 peaked, dropped down to 600, 670. H1N1 peaked at just under 3,500, and then his last data set is at 1,115. That's this year. Last year, now we want to compare H3, all right, in week 7. That's the last data set, 438. So actually, last year was less because in H3, in week 7, it was at 673. Week 7 for H3 is 438. So it was less. Now, in Now in H1N1, week 7, just the last data set. It's 515. Remember, our number is 1,115. All right, so week 7, last 15 days, this year is worse than last year. Now let's go to 5. Now, 5, we had week 5 for H3. Week 5, we had 3,000. Okay. Last year, week 5, H3 was 394. Let me just double check that. Week 5, H3, 438. 438. That was last year. This year, week 5 is at 3,000. So H3 is a lot worse in week 5. Now, what about H1 in week 5? H1N1. Week 5, we had 692. 692. Last year, 692 was last year. This year, in week 5, we have 3,000. This is H1N1, 3,477. So the bottom line is that we're worse off this year than last year, especially for H3 and for H1N1. And this is part of the reason why around you everyone seems to be sick. And in some population densities, we're also seeing issues with people that are sick. So just keep in mind that we do have, more cases this year, especially in week 5 and also in week 7. All right. So, and it's peaking. It's going to start going down. Like, for example, you can see in the full data set, it's last year, we're looking at peaking in week 52, week 51, and then start going down. Now, that's not necessarily the case every year. So week 51 was the peak for last year. This year, we don't know because data is still coming in. We might have had a peak in week 5, but we don't know yet. All right. Probably week 5 was the peak. So it can be shifted a little bit. All right. So we probably are at our peak. But you look at these data sets, you can see, okay, it can go down and then go back up. It can go down, right? And then bounce back up and be there for a little while and then come back down, right? And that usually is taking place in week 5 or so. That was last year, all right? Now let's just take a look at pre-2019, 20. So let's take a look at 2017, all right? Okay, you're peaking at week 2. So you can see it can shift a little bit. So most likely we were probably at the peak in week 5. That's probably the case. We don't know for sure, but that's probably the case. So the worst of it has already passed. Okay, that would have been week 5. Now week 7, but the bottom line is that even with us being at the peak, past the peak, At the peak, we were at 3,000 for H3. And last year, at the peak, which was 51, week 51, it was at 1,200. What am I looking at? I wish their charts were a little bit better. H50, H at the, let's look at peak to peak instead of week to week for between the different years. That's what I'm looking at. So in week 5, it looks like we're at the peak for this year for H3. And H3 is at 3,000. Okay. So let's take a look at H3 for last year at the peak. And H3 at the peak was in week 8. And that was only at 442. So you can see that it's a lot worse. Now, let's take a look peak to peak relative to this year and last year for H1N1. All right, we're going to do the same idea here. Okay, so we're maxing out at 3,477 for H1N1. And last year, at the peak for H1N1, it was in week 51, and it was only 1,242. So you can see peak to peak analysis, we're worse off this year than last year. And if you compare it to week, we're worse off this year than last year. So that's my takeaway on this, is that influenza H1N1 and H3, both of these are influenza A's, are worse this year than last year. So, and it's substantial, a substantial amount. So that means that you're going to just see more people sick. Now, I'm not so hell-bent on that interactive graphic there. So, just keep in mind, I'll play it a little bit, maybe. Or you can see the years how it was like there's nothing for H5, and then all of a sudden it starts popping up. And nothing. And then all of a sudden last year was a lot. This year. Now, let's take a look at H3. H3. H1 and 1. Which version? Eight, yeah, this one. H. I don't like this interactive graphic. I don't think it's really telling you much. Years. Confirm novel. I don't know. I don't like the graphic, how you're using it. I wish that this graph was a little bit more interactive year over year. But the big point here, the big point that I want to make is that H3 influenza A and H1N1 is worse this year in terms of the week, looking at week 5 and week 7, and also peak to peak of this year and peak of last year. So please go to my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and help support my work. I am, trying to inform you about what's going on. And this year, influenza has started to become worse. Earlier this year, it seemed to be that it would track lower, but that's not, or earlier in the season, but that's not the case now. So we're probably at the peak. All right. We're probably not at the peak, but past the peak for this year. All right. And that peak probably was week 5 of this year. And it is going down, but peak to peak, this peak to last year's peak, this year's worse. And even week to week, week 5 to week 5 last year, this year's worse. And also week 7 this year is worse than last year. So please go to my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and help support my work. You can also subscribe to my 4 channels on YouTube. I also have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. Please follow me on all those channels. And please help support my work by donating on my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. You can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or Buy Me a Coffee, or be a paid member to my Patreon channel. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.